Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mike Little. I'm the mayor for the District of North Vancouver. And tonight I want to welcome you all to our council workshop for Monday, April 19th at 7 o'clock. This meeting is being held without the public in attendance. And so I have a resolution that's been sent around in the agenda that I will look for a member of council. It's been presented in the agenda, so if any member of council could please move that agenda. This is the resolution to hold the meeting without the public in attendance. Moved by Councillor Back. Is there a seconder on the motion? Second by Councillor Hanson. Call the question. All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. Council, we have an agenda that's been circulated. Are there any errors or omissions from the agenda as presented? Okay, hearing none. Will someone please move adoption of the agenda? Moved by Councillor Kern, second by Councillor Back. I'll call the question on the motion. All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. I will just say all three of the people that reached out to me and sent texts, I see they now have joined the meeting, so maybe there was just a brief connection problem or something, but they do appear as though they're all on the meeting. Okay, so we have the agenda that has been passed. We have several sets of minutes that are from previous workshops of council. And so we have the minutes from the February 9th council workshop, February 16th council workshop, February 23rd, and March 1st. Are there any errors or omissions from those 4 meeting minutes as presented in the package?
So moved.
Hearing none, I'll take council that they be adopted by Councillor Murray. Is there a seconder? Second by Councillor Back. Call the question on the motion. All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries, and those meeting minutes are now adopted. Moving on to, yes.
I just had another text saying that the main link on the main page is not working.
Okay.
So they're getting in, but that main link on the link on the main page is not working for people. So.
We'll have to investigate, but all of the people who have said it wasn't working that talked to me have also subsequently come into the meeting. So
I know they've come in another way, but the link that, you know, if you're not familiar with it and you're going to the main page and you click on that link, then it doesn't seem to be working. And I think those are coming from the same people that texted you.
We think the problem is the link is listed accurately in a number of places. One of them is a PDF document where the hyperlink may not be a live hyperlink, but it's listed in a few other places on the web page. And we'll take steps to make sure that that PDF document does have a live hyperlink in it.
Okay. Okay. But we can confirm that our web streaming service is also working, or is this just simply Zoom only for tonight?
That's right, Your Worship. It's Zoom only. We've, for now, abandoned the web streaming. Everybody who wants to be in the meeting or observe the meeting comes into Zoom. And as you recall, there's 2 statuses. Us speakers and those with video are panelists.
Yeah.
The observers, which are akin to the gallery, those are the attendees.
Okay. Okay. Well, at this point, appears so people are figuring out how to connect one way or another, and some of the links may not be live links, but we will investigate and make sure that that is that people who wanted to join were able to join. And then we also will have after the meeting, the recording of the meeting will be provided on the district website, so there will still be a record of the meeting as well. And also, the nature of the meeting is to provide feedback on the options going forward for the tax distribution workshop, but the decisions will be made really effectively at a regular meeting of council coming up in a couple of weeks. And so if we determine that people have not been able to provide feedback, we'll make sure that there's an opportunity for people to provide feedback between here and the final council decision on the matter. But I would say that we have enough to continue on tonight as is. And so at this point, I'm going to move on to item 3.1, tax distribution report. And I see Mr. Stewart on first.
Your Worship, I just want to try to simplify the 2 issues that are in front of council. One is there is a risk associated with the assessment appeals with respect to the non-capped industry. And we need to talk about how we would deal with that. That's one issue, period. The second issue is if we want to give some support to business, realizing that we can't be discriminative with respect to business, but that's something we can do and deal with out of reserves. So I just want to separate the two because I think there's some impression that we're trying to borrow from industry to pay for business, and that's not the case. The fact of the matter is we have a risk associated with business because of the assessment appeals, and we have perhaps a political desire to support business. We can deal with either one of those, but they ought to be considered separate. That's my introductory comments.
Okay, thank you. Handing over to Mr. Wardell.
Through your worship and to council and the public, I'll be sharing my screen. If you could just give me a minute. Okay, can you see my presentation?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. Okay, so this is background information on the property tax distribution. The budget has been set at this point in time and approved at 3%, which is 2% for inflation and 1% for our asset management work. The issues before you, as articulated by Mr. Stewart, what is major industry, and the second is the impacts of COVID on businesses. As council hopefully recalls, we've done a lot of research in the background looking for different ways of supporting business, including reaching out to the province and expressing a desire to find other paths to support our local businesses. And the province has effectively said to us that their legislation and their initiatives, along with the feds, are sufficient, and there's really no intention to change their legislation at this point in time, beyond what we can find in the community charter. And I'll be walking through some of that work that we've done in a couple of slides. First up is major industry, and I'd like to point out that this slide articulates uplands only. It does not include any water lots or railway lots. These are the main folios that you'll find along the waterfront. So the non-cat uplands are valued at approximately $4.3 million an acre. It's very difficult to compare uplands water lots in the context of other areas of the Lower Mainland. And when you look at this, what staff have done is compared our waterfronts within 25 meters of the waterfront. And as you can see, District of North Vancouver residential waterfront is about $10.3 million an acre. Yes, the tax rates are different, and those are in red, and I've used the estimated tax rate for 2021 to facilitate this discussion. And as you can see, and I say this on an after-tax basis because as we all know, for business, property taxes are tax deductible. The after-tax cost is about 3 times, a little less than 3 times the taxes that are applied on a residential waterfront. So while the tax rates might be significantly wider, the actual tax impact on the land is about a little less than 3 to 1. With regards to Mr. Stewart's introductory comments, there is about $840,000 of 2021 financial risk due to the assessment challenges that we see on the waterfront. At this time, I would like to remind Council that Council tax strategy has been in place since 2009, and starting in 2010, we started lowering the tax rate. The background behind that, which I bring up once a year at tax distribution, is that major industry did say to Council that at $47.62 per thousand of assessed value, it's a high tax rate for them to invest in their properties. So they wanted Council to work with them to grind that tax rate down to a lower amount. And Council did that by making the decision to not tax improvements. So, and I say it this way because not every industry on the waterfront invested and put improvements in place. But for those that did, when we lowered taxes in total at the tax class level, it lowered taxes for the entire waterfront. Council gets to set one rate, and that rate applies to all businesses equally. So what you see now in 2020 is the rate dropped down to $11.68. And a lot of that rate reduction happened in 2018 when BC Assessment completely revalued the waterfront for the first time in almost a couple of decades. And that spoke to the challenges that we've faced over the last 4 years with assessment appeals and tax shifts between businesses and all the challenges that come with the Port Property Tax Act and having cap properties and non-cap properties. So in that context, that 1168 per thousand in 2020 in the district compared to a regional average of 2125 per thousand in the region. At this point in time, for 2018 to 2021, the remaining appeal cumulative risk that's quantifiable, and that doesn't mean there isn't more coming, but the risks that are quantifiable currently total about $3 million, and our reserve balance is about $3.6 million. And as council will recall, in 2018 and 2019, we levied an additional $3.4 million each year on these classes. And the purpose of that was to really indicate that our residents and our small businesses weren't picking up that tax tab. Interestingly enough, that $6.8 million combined is now sitting as a liability on the district's books and payable to C-SPAN, subject to our ongoing appeal process at this point in time. So what remains in the reserve is $3.6 million. So what council asked me to do in the context of bringing options forward, and I'm trying to create some goalposts here. And one of the things, just as a quick one-off, is staff will continue to work on getting the Port Property Tax Act eliminated. It was supposed to be eliminated in 2018, but the last government extended it indefinitely. So that's a continuing conversation that will be ongoing for a period of time. When we look at this slide, I'm saying council could tax up to 1.849 million on class 4 major industry. And what you're taxing is the improvements that you did not tax that this group of properties made between 2010 and 2014. So you drove the rate down for a decade, and now is the time to actually reflect on that and see if there's anything council wishes to do to adjust and levy those taxes on a prospective basis. Cumulatively, that benefit is about $8.8 million to the end of 2020. The reason you would do that is articulated in the second bullet point, is that council's strategy, again, has been to lower the tax rate, and it's gone down as far as $11.86. What will happen as we move forward is that tax rate will go up naturally as improvement values decline. And we'll talk a little bit about more of that later. As you can see in the box on the right, the regional average of all class 4 industrial properties across the region is $21.25 a thousand. For those that are deep sea port oriented, which includes the North Shore, Vancouver, Burnaby, Delta, not the rivers, the average rate per thousand is about $23.55. When you look at that deep sea and exclude the district's $11.86 per thousand, the rate does go up to about $26.52 across those 4 or 5 municipalities that I've mentioned. The impacts on small business continue. The particularly small businesses are struggling accessing federal and provincial programs. We've looked at how we could find ways of supporting businesses.
Your worship, can I suggest that we separate these two issues and we just deal with the industry first and any input we have on that, and then we'll get into business? Because I do think they're very separate.
We can do that. Now we do have a speaker signed up, and I believe they'll want to address probably both.
Well, I just think it overloads council a little bit in terms of information, and the issues are pretty distinct and separate. So just my suggestion is we deal with major industry, and then we deal with business.
Sure, let's have a check-in with the council. Council, are there any questions at this point on the major industry side of the presentation that Mr. Wardell has had. Why don't we go through a round of questions, and then hopefully that'll help put a bit of a firewall between the two discussions. But I've got Councillor Murray first.
Thank you. Can we just dig in a little bit to the taxes that we drove down in regards to major industry? Because I think the suggestion, and this has come up before in the past, that it was money that we never had in the first place.
Through your worship.
Cumulative $8 million total, Mr. Wardell, that you're talking about.
Through your worship, if the council of the day, and let's take a step back and talk about assessments first. When improvements are made on properties, those are taxable to the extent that they fall under the Assessment Act, which is not within council's control. Growth in assessment value through improvements, be it in town centers or between town centers or on the waterfront, is how we invest in the growth-related aspects or renewal aspects of certain investments. And the example I gave was, in this case, the Phillips Avenue overpass. So that particular bridge was built for about $25 million. Its replacement value is slightly over $28 million now, and that will grow. And not only do you have to maintain that asset, but eventually you have to replace it. And a replacement value, excluding maintenance, would be about $500,000 a year moving forward. So that's just one example of how the growth in improvements in the tax system in British Columbia helps alleviate the growth pains that every municipality goes through. So from that perspective, when council made the decision to not tax those improvements, it lowered the rate. Okay,
But
those
it
are
just
still
lowered the rate.
valid.
It
It lowered the
Your
rate.
worship, I have to interject here. That's, and I greatly appreciate Andy's description, but you could say the same thing for the fact that we didn't apply a 4% tax increase to residential, or we didn't apply a 5% tax, and you could argue that that's a grant that we've given them, or that's a break that we've given them. And the fact of the matter, council decided to go down from 49 to whatever it is, 17 or 13. To describe that as a gift to industry is just, I'm sorry, that's a political decision that was made, and it's not fair that industry has to wear that. Those are a political decision that was made, and I think we need to move forward, not backwards. We need to be where we are in the present, not what happened in the past. Council's made decisions. They've made policy decisions, and we were really high at 49. We brought those rates down, and to describe that bringing those rates down is a gift to industry, it was a political decision, not a gift.
Yeah, and that's fair. Where I think that it's relevant to both your points is in comparing us to other municipalities in the region. If other municipalities in the region also took similar strategies to forego tax for improvements on properties, and maybe it's a relevant discussion. If they didn't, and every other municipality, sort of actually taxed the increases in valuations based on improvements on the properties, and the district was the only standalone one, then I would say that, yeah, it's difficult to characterize it as an opportunity cost and say that it's money that we should have collected. Then you'd be right. It was very much a political decision on a strategy. So I guess where it's relevant is if we're comparing ourselves to other municipalities, did they tax those improvements, and it has left them in a different position, I guess would be.
Yeah, but your worship, and I don't disagree with you, but the fundamental issue is we decided that $49 was too high.
Too much.
Yeah.
And we needed to bring it down, and we did that, and that was a political decision. And I don't think we should be charging that to industry, saying we made a political decision to be more equitable in the region in terms of our average rate.
And that's the fair question. I think you've nailed the fair question right there, Mr. Stewart. Mr. Wardell, have Have other municipalities in the region had a similar strategy, or did they tax improvements along the way?
The district in North Vancouver is unique in that the port properties on the waterfront here are both capped and non-capped. And it's always been an equitable challenge of trying to get the non-capped industries down to at least the 27.50 per thousand that the port properties under the Port Property Tax Act benefit from. A key difference, though, is that those valuations are capped by legislation, and these valuations for non-capped properties are subject to the market. These are freehold properties, like many of the other properties that you see across the region. The region doesn't have or has not been inclined, as I understand it, and from my living memory, ever reduce taxes intentionally to grind the rates down to a certain amount. That is unique to the district.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I don't know if that helps address.
I
concern,
I
Commissioner?
think though, just to add a little bit of history though, and Mike, you were around, we did that because we wanted to be able to support business because they did pay a huge amount of taxes and they were contributing, a significant amount of money and using very little of the services within the municipality when we were having these discussions. And they were a backbone of the community. They built the community. So that was, some of the discussion around that political decision that was made long ago. But my next question, and Mr. Stewart wants to keep this separate. So in your recommendation, Mr. Wardell, you say major industry tax improvements at 1.849 to then reduce the business class by 1.849. So how does that jive with Mr. Stewart's point and my point that?
So both Mr. Stewart and your point, you are both correct. You can treat these issues separately. And I'll go back to what I said originally in my introductory comments. What I provided council is a set of goalposts. Council can decide to not levy 1.8 on major industry, or they could levy 1.8, but I would not be levying more than that, because the way I have looked at the decade plus of work that's gone into taxes in the North Shore here is when council drove that rate down, their commitment was to get it down to 27.50. Okay, we are at $11.38, and from an equitable perspective, when you look at what every other property in the district that does improvements, those improvements are taxed. Okay, so back to Mr. Stewart's point about being a political decision. There is no reason council can make a decision to not go to zero and just leave it at 3%. What I'm presenting is a range of options, and all we're doing is talking about the outer limits of these options right now. It's council's choice to debate that amongst themselves and arrive at it and agree upon a solution. And all I'm doing is providing those upper end goalposts. Okay, one on major industry and one for business. And that brings me to the second point. Council did ask me to bring options back, and I committed to doing that for small business. That also can be 0 at 3%. And I don't want to mix these up too much, but we're not aware as staff of any other municipality in the region not doing anything other than what's happening and been already approved in budgets. So this is also unique, this conversation to the district around providing a benefit to Class 6 small business. So we have a model at the end of this presentation where you can debate what you want to do and find common ground, and we'll bring that up at the end. And I'm more than happy to, if you want to ask more questions on major non-capped interests, we're more than happy to entertain those. But to Mr. Stewart's point, if it's a political decision and you want to stay at 0, that's also a decision.
Okay, can we carry on with the major industry discussion? I have Councillor Bond next.
Thanks, Merlin. I'm going to make sure I lower my hand. Lower my hand right away to make sure I don't get confused later on in the presentation. It's more of a high-level comment here, and perhaps staff can help me with this a little bit. But I feel like we're getting really bogged down in very specific implementation details of a more generic tax strategy. And I think even backing up a little bit further, some higher level context would be useful for the understanding of council. I'll speak for myself, for my understanding and perhaps the understanding of the public. Now, my understanding of the history behind driving the rate down in the major industry class was that at the time, council thought that as a class, they were paying too much of a share of the total tax bill. That's my understanding. That's kind of a high level concept. We've got one tax bill and we've got 4 classes, and council's job is to decide how much does each of those classes contribute towards the total bill. And so council decided that of those 4 classes, major industry was paying too much, and staff implemented a tax strategy to reduce that amount, or at least keep that amount similar in response to variations in the taxes legislated by the provincial or the Port Property Tax Act and market valuations in the property. So what I think would be useful is kind of stepping back to that level and saying we have 4 tax classes. Over time, how has the contribution of each of those classes towards the total tax bill changed? Has it changed in terms of how much each class pays towards the total tax bill? And does council feel that the share that each class is paying is still fair? I think there's a good discussion around business, and maybe, you know, at least during this time, we'll talk about it next, in COVID, that business may not be able to support the same contribution towards the total tax bill that they have in previous years, and council might direct staff to reduce that share and pick it up in other areas. So, you know, I think some numbers around how do the 4 classes contribute to the total tax bill? How has that changed over time, so that council can have a bit of a discussion around what seems fair in order in, you know, response to how much each of those classes you know, consume the services that the district provides.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. So the you know, when we're talking about Mr. Wardell shift amongst the classes, the rate gives you a bit of a false impression of what people are paying based on the valuation of the average parcel within a class. But I think what Councillor Bond is asking specifically, you know, if 23% of the taxes 10 years ago were carried by this class, what percentage of the total bill are they carrying now? Is that what you're looking for, Councillor Bond? Just simply
Yeah.
the portion share of the class.
Yeah.
Mr. Wardell, do you have that kind of number tonight?
I can come up with a number. Just give me a minute.
Yeah, Your Worship, if I could just make a comment, that one of the fundamental issues we have is that we have capped and non-capped, which has a disproportionate impact on the District of North Vancouver. So what we have is non-capped industries paying in some cases, and I'm guessing here right now, but I think it's pretty close. Non-capped industries paying 3 times what a previous government decided that capped industries would pay as a rate. And that's the fundamental issue that we've got, and that's the challenge that we're facing. Is it's not just a matter of who is paying what in proportion to other classes. We also have and it's distinct to North Vancouver, we have a number of industries that are paying a disproportionately less assessed value and tax value than others. And we're seeing that play out in the assessment values and the appeals, the assessment of values. So this is a very complex problem. There's no question about it.
Yeah. But there's 2 factors. It is both the rate and the capped effectively value, or what they're basing the assessed value of the property on. So
yeah.
What I will say is this, because I have to pull up a couple of spreadsheets here to have a quick look at it. Back in 2010, the combined contribution of the entire waterfront class was 9.5%, of which approximately 5% of that was non-cap major industry. Okay. In 2017, give me one sec. These are large files, so it'll take a minute to pop up.
Just
I
a
think we have to
clarification.
sort of see this too, right? Like, it would be nice if we could have this forwarded
Yeah.
to us.
So
for
by
next week.
2017, that was 6%. I can get Mr. Ariero to summarize this and send that out next week. Yeah, by 2017, that was a combined total of 9.5%, with approximately 6% picked up by non-cap major industry. And today, it is 10.1% in total, with about 6% picked up by non-capped major industry. And that's primarily a shift back into capped because of the recent investments by FiberCo, which we're all aware of taking place on the waterfront. So it's hovering about 9.5 to 10% in total. It's been that way for a decade. And the shifts are less than a point in between capped and non-capped through that period of time.
So is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, it would also be useful to understand if those ratios for the other classes as well.
Yeah.
Because in that information, it seems like.
Yeah, I have that available.
Okay, yeah.
So, so for 2010, let's have a quick look. The business class paid 17.4% and residents paid 71.5%. In 2017, the business class is paying 17.7% and residents were paying 71.4%. And for 2021, business class is paying 16.7%, a little higher than that, but 16.7%, and residents are paying 71.7%.
Sorry to interrupt. When you say businesses, are you just class 6? You're
Yep,
referring to
class
just class
6 businesses. Yeah, so I'll say major industry and business.
Thanks.
That'll help separate that. So these percentages of 100 haven't really shifted more than a point one way or the other from what I can see here. And we can certainly put that together in a little chart and send that out to council.
Yeah. But basically business during the strategy was at one point collecting slightly higher percentage, but now it's gone back to effectively where it was at the beginning of the strategy.
Yeah,
And,
so
residential was for temporarily collecting a lower, slightly lower portion, but now it's gone back to where it was.
So when we say tax strategy, it's all about major non-capped. So the small business class 6 in 2010 was 17.4, residents were 71.5. Today, that is 16.7 for small business and 71.7 for residents. So the share of the property tax levy is fairly stable from that perspective, but the dynamics of property taxes vary by properties within each class, which is why you hear from residents or businesses or major industry that have these issues. For example, in major industry for this year, BC Assessment changed the assessments for C-SPAN, okay? Because there was a ruling. Can you just bear with me for one sec? One sec.
You can just take it, Andy. It's fine.
Okay, I'll be right back.
So I'll just add a comment there. I think that's useful information just on the percentage that each class is contributing. If I know that the light industry class is a relatively small percentage, but if Andy can add that in there, that would be great. And then this just provides more context for me around when we're talking around the specific strategies. Like Mr. Stewart said, obviously within each class, there are additional dynamics on top of this kind of higher level picture. But I think this provides kind of at least from a percentage standpoint, real dollars might be different, and understanding that relatively speaking, each class of property is contributing a similar amount towards the total tax bill, at least for the past decade. A further discussion would be how have the services required or demanded by each of these classes changed over that time, and that might help council decide whether this continues to be a fair distribution for the total bill. I don't know if we're at that point tonight.
Okay, so to summarize, council is, through the community charter, limited to taxing at the class level. Okay, the distributions are fairly stable and have been that way over the last decade. So for what I'm presenting to council tonight, and I'll say it again, is there's just some parameters here. If council has made the decision not to retrospectively look back at the improvements that business has made to lower the tax rate, then we need to move on from that. And council, when we get to this decision matrix, we can talk about what that might look like there at that point in time, if that's acceptable to your worship and the rest of council.
Okay, thank you very much. Next speaker I have is Councillor Back.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a brief comment. Thank you very much, Andy, for the presentation. You really simplified a fairly complex thing to understand here. Just on this specific issue, I do support what's being recommended. Given that since 2010, we've been on this path to progressively reduce property taxes of the non-cap major industrial, and it sounds like we've done a pretty good job of that. Getting down to under $12. When the regional average is 21.25, I think if we come in at 17.50, that does compare fairly favorably, and I think that's something that we can certainly defend. Yeah, so I think that on the small business issue, I really do think that we need to do something, and I think that's something that we could be proud of, even though not a lot of other municipalities, or maybe none, are doing anything like this for the small businesses. I think this is something that we should definitely be looking at.
Thank you, Councillor Back. Next speaker I have is Councillor Hanson.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. There was discussion of this pending these tax appeals and the potential for monies to be effectively refunded to the non-capped heavy industry. And I understand C-SPAN succeeded in their appeal, although I gather there's another appeal pending, so it's not concluded. And then the reserve is 3.6 million, as I understand it. Do we have any idea what the potential exposure could be? Following on with the idea that it was our wish that be reserved from this class, the class who are appealing, and not expose residents to the potential of having to indemnify for that litigation risk. Do we have any more idea of the breadth of that litigation risk? And can you confirm that we're talking exclusively now about appeals brought by non-capped heavy industry? Thank you.
Yes, through your worship. The staff estimate of the appeals that are remaining and yet unresolved, including C-SPAN, the quantifiable risk at this point in time is approximately $3 million from what we can see. Okay, and that's in relation to the reserve balance at 3.6. So what I'm saying at this point in time is pending a future estimate of anything that might come out in additional years worth of appeals or additional risk that is yet not known or quantifiable. Our best estimate is $3 million on a reserve of 3.6, and that's reasonable.
Thank you.
But I think further to your other question, though, Councillor Hanson, I mean, when the decision was made to protect the other classes from it, it was done because if that particular party's valuation was dramatically lower, it would have been made up within the class. So the other partners within the class would have ended up contributing more money to the overall tax bill, isolating the class from the other classes. And so the argument has been made that if their valuation was lower, therefore it should change the whole spectrum and all classes should be contributing to the correction.
Yeah,
No,
the bigger challenge, Your Worship, is that if this happens, and in some cases the assessment appeals now are going on for year and year and year and year, and so it's an accumulative risk, and we may not have an opportunity just to assign that to the class, and so the balance of the classes, the residential, the business, etc., we'll have to pick that up. That's the challenge we're facing right now, is because the fact of the matter is that these risks cannot be assigned just to the class unless we make a decision to do that. And then, of course, if in fact these assessment appeals do not result in any changes, well, then we can lower the rate again and return the money back to industry. But the fact of the matter is that the assessment, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to be really simple, Council. The assessment challenges are a risk to the district that we will have to deal with, and industry is choosing to challenge every value, and they have for the last 3 or 4 years.
Right.
So this is a risk to the entire municipality, not just to the class, because if that was just to change just for the class, I doubt we would be able to recoup it just from the class.
Right. So through Your Worship, to follow up on Mr. Stewart's comments, in prior meetings with the business, the major industry, I mean, they did say, why don't you wait until these appeals settle? And Mr. Stewart was very clear. These are multi-year in nature. There is a reason why we levied 3.5 million on this class in 2018 and another 3.5 million in 2019, but did not levy any in 2020. And the reason for that is that reserve was deemed to be sufficient at that time. And with the C-SPAN appeal, that's proven to be the case. The additional risk we think is reasonable and balanced at this point in time. It remains to be seen to a future year whether that requires an adjustment or not. But we're not recommending an adjustment based on tax loss risk at this point.
Yeah, it's a very complicated matter. I mean, even when you do determine if the courts take the appeal and shift the curve on the taxation from that one partner, that doesn't mean the trajectory changes. It just means that you've shifted the curve. And so unless you're changing the parameters for valuation, I think we're going to be in the same problem 5 years from now.
Yeah, well, let's, on a positive note, I anticipate some of these appeals to resolve themselves, hopefully in the next year or two.
Thank you, Mr. Wardell. Councillor, so I guess it'll be Councillor Hanson.
My apologies, I didn't bring down my hand.
Thank you, Councillor Curran.
Thanks for the presentation. So the Port Property Tax Act, I know for many years, municipalities have pleaded with the provincial government or to the ministry and have been unsuccessful. It was supposed to be successful in 2018. What is their current position? Because like the last stated position we have that I could find was actually from a previous government that was not interested. So what is the position currently?
At this point in time, I would think that the Port Property Tax Act is still viable from the provincial perspective. I don't think any major changes are going to take place until this pandemic resolves itself. What I will say, though, is last year, through Mr. Stewart's office, we approached the province and identified some weaknesses in the Port Property Tax Act where we saw taxes shifting from cap properties to non-cap properties. And we managed to convince them to change the Port Property Tax Act. So the $27.50 rate that's in that act was effectively frozen, and it's a minimum as opposed to a rate that floats any lower. So that was a good move on behalf of the district, but I think that fixed it for
Yeah.
anybody affected across the province.
So Mr. Waddell is being very politically correct in all of his comments. Okay, I'm not going to be. You know, we have identified issues with best use for assessment purposes. We've identified issues with the Property Tax Act, and now we have this apparent tax on air. This government has not been responsive to dealing with the issues that we've identified with. I just want to be really blunt about that. We will try and we will continue to try, but the fact of the matter is that there's some fundamental problems with the assessment process in BC, and it needs to be identified and addressed by this government.
I could tell that you were just waiting to chime in there, Mr. Stewart. So I'll just keep it focused on major industry. So my position would be the same as it's been previously. I do support the taxing the improvements. Everyone in the municipality would pay taxes on improvements. So I do support that. And I do recognize the gross inequity between capped and non-capped. And obviously our position has been that it's not fair, and that we're actually not receiving a fair price from a lot of the big polluters properties. Properties. So yeah, I'll support, I do support the adding to the reserve yeah, sort of the same position that I had on it last year. But this is actually charging for improvements, which we haven't previously done.
Your worship, just to be very clear, the recommendation is that the risk the district is facing be added to the industrial levy. And if in fact, as a result of changes to the assessments and the appeals, whatever, that we can refund that, we will. I'll as long as I'm a CO, I'll tell you, we'll do that.
Within the plan.
Sure, if we're successful.
Right.
But hopefully this, it is Groundhog's Day, right? Every year, same thing, here we are. Yeah, it's, unfortunately, a lot of, what we're faced with at a municipal level is out of our control, because we can't we can't change the cap non-capped. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you very much. Next up, I have Councillor Murray.
Can we just clarify, Mr. Wardell, your recommendation is not that we add to the reserve?
My recommendation at this point, as articulated on the slide before you, is the appeal risk is at $3 million. The reserve is at $3.6 million. And in my opinion, it was reasonable to leave that for one more year.
Yeah.
Should council deem it to be need an additional levy to the reserve, for example, the 1.8, my only comment to that is that that 3.6 million is currently covered by approximately 94% by businesses and residents. And I made that point back in 2018, that the reserve is sufficient, but it's currently funded by business and residents. So to Mr. Stewart's point, should council decide to increase that reserve and keep, I'll say, the non-capped properties that are appealing whole in the context of they fund their own risk, then yes, you could put something into that reserve.
Okay,
Councillor
so
Murray, did that address your concern?
yeah, I just wanted to clarify that that was the reserve is sufficient for the current needs.
In total, I'm just pointing out though that it's primarily funded by businesses and residents, this remaining balance.
Right.
Small businesses.
But the question in regards to where we're going to get funds to be able to impact business, is that
that's what we're going to move. Once we can get past major industry, we're going to go on to class 6 commercial businesses, yes.
Because they are connected in the slides, but Mr. Stewart suggested that we separate them.
Yes,
so.
yeah, absolutely. Yes, it's absolutely council's choice. And to be clear, Mr. Stewart's recommendation is a very clear separation, and it lines up with our policy approach. However, in a tax distribution workshop, council does have the ability to tax shift. That's why it's called tax distribution. Okay, doesn't necessarily mean you'll do it.
Thank you, Mr. Waddell. Councillor Murray.
Well, I just want to be clear that your recommendation on your presentation that you emailed us this afternoon.
Yep. Right here. I have no opinion one or the other. I've said major industry tax up to $1.8 million. And to keep it simple, business reduce taxes by $1.8 million. Those don't have to line up. They're not connected. I could have put two different numbers there, like 1.6 and 1.8, but maybe I could have done that and it would have been simpler. But there's no need to line those up and match them together.
No, Your Worship, they're not connected. We could just stop that.
Yeah.
Okay. There's no logical reason to do that. There's a financial reason to do that, and I appreciate Andy's desire to do that. But the fact of the matter is that these are two principal different issues. And the first issue is, how do we deal with major industry and the risk associated with the district with respect to their appeals? And the second issue is what council wants to do.
Right.
Correct. And they don't have to be connected. They're not connected. We can financially deal with both of them. And I think it's really important that we deal with the first one, which is how do we deal with the major industry, and then we go into business.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Councillor Murray, your hand's still up. Your comments are done.
Well, I just want to be really clear. So we are not adding to the reserve for the appeals. We are leaving it the way it is.
If council is comfortable with a $3.6 million reserve, and I'll say it again, funded by primarily residents and businesses, it's still a $3.6 million reserve, then you're good. And we'll reassess this every year. We know when those risks become real that we'll be levying taxes to compensate for that. It will not end up on businesses or residents. So if council feels comfortable with a low tax rate for non-cap major industry for one more year, then that's what the decision will be.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Murray. I believe I have Councillor Bond next.
Thanks. So on this specific point, and refresh my memory, Mr. Wardell, the balance in the tax loss reserve and or the assessment appeal and tax loss reserve started out around this number of around 3.6 million a number of years ago.
Back in 2017, correct.
And at that point, the initial amount in that reserve was funded, as you see in your report, by residents and business.
Generically by the split of the tax levy that we talked about with your last question. 71% by business, 71% by residents, 17% by business, etc. So that split in general terms is how that risk reserve is funded.
Yeah.
Regardless of who dips into it. But non-capped pressures, as Mr. Stewart's articulated, are significant and they're material to the district's financial well-being. So when non-cap properties appeal, we monitor that and we watch it and we adjust. Last year, we recommended no change. Okay. What's happened this year at the end of 2020 was the first round was won by by C-SPAN, and we are obligated to record a liability of $6.8 million and draw that reserve down from what was over 10 million down to 3.6. That 3.6 remains for the rest of the risk that's out there.
Yeah. So I'll just continue on where I was. So the initial amount of this reserve was funded roughly by the split of the classes, and then in 2018, 2019, council's direction was to levy that additional amount to bring the reserve up to 10 million, specifically on the heavy industry class. And now the reserve is back down to kind of where we started, because that was a good decision, and that money is then going back out the door from that reserve to pay for these assessment appeals. So at this point in time, you're comfortable with the current amount of the reserve, and obviously it's council's decision. But I think that if you're comfortable with that amount of the tax reserve, then there's no need to levy an additional amount for the tax reserve onto that class at this point in time for 2021. So that would be a position that I would support. What I'm wondering is, where does that put us in terms of rates now?
Well, I can bring that up if I can stop sharing. If I could stop sharing my screen for a minute and reshare it in a different way. See if I can get this up here. I think it's this one here. Just give me one moment. Okay, do you see this large series of spreadsheet numbers before you?
Yes.
Okay, I will highlight this. This is the 3% and the tax increase that is approved in the budget. So you can see that 2.2 million is on class 1 residents. There's $186,000 on class 4 non-capped. There's approximately $524,000 on class 6. The discussion that's taking place right now, should council choose to go that route, would look like this. And you would see it would go into this council reserve here, and you would see the levy go up to $17 and say 42 cents. Could have made it 17.52, but you get the idea. By not doing that, the tax rate will be $13.59 versus last year's $11.68. Okay. The reason for the increase of $2 is not just the 3%, but a valuation reduction on C-SPAN on the successful appeal they made, which saw their value drop $60 million. So when value drops on assessment, the rate goes up. Okay. The taxes don't change. Okay. So it's always the rate that's the variable.
Can I just clarify, Mr. Wardy?
Sure.
When I was asking about this the other day on the 1359, you said it was actually 1562.
Well, what I gave you on Monday, and that's worth a quick conversation. What I gave you on Monday was a quick conversation with what's known as the completed roll. It's information that's provided to us in December. We did not finalize the revised roll in which we levy taxes, which we got from BC Assessment in early April. So we've been working hard to pull those numbers together. What you saw was what you're referring to is the best estimate that I had at the time. These are the numbers that will end up on the tax levy. These are the rates.
Councillor Bond, the floor is yours.
Yeah. So what you're showing here, just to be clear, is that if we do not levy an additional assessment,
Correct.
The non-cap properties for the tax risk, and we treat them the same as every other class, everyone. It's 3%. This is the kind of the total numbers of how much.
That's correct. Everything that you see on this slide right now, everything here, that is approved within the budget. Okay. The final distribution is currently 3% on all these key classes, except for the cap properties. Okay.
So I'll say that I think, at least for this major industry discussion, I think that makes sense for this year, since we don't have that additional risk with the tax appeals. I think we treat the classes the same until we get to the next discussion and decide if we want to treat business differently and where that is going to come from. So I think
now I do have a series of slides, but if I could just work towards the outcome and then work my way back to the slides.
Councillor, sorry, I think Councillor Bond still had something else to say here, but what I'd like to do is, Councillor Hanson has his hand up as well. I'm assuming it's about the major industry piece. Let's get that done before we move on to the other slides about the others. We're almost there.
So just to be clear on my point, then on the major industry, I think to close off that tax appeal and assessment risk reserve question, I don't think it's necessary to apply that this year. You will obviously let us know in future years if we need to make a different decision, but I think that's fair. And I think that's all the direction. If I'm clear, that's all the direction you need on that specific topic for that class. So those are my comments, and I guess it would be good to get everyone, if everyone else is in.
Your worship, I would really appreciate all the rest of the council's input, but if there's no appetite to put money aside for risk for major industry, then I would just suggest we move forward. Honestly, Councillor Bond has spelled this out quite completely. If there's not a concern about industry, about risk, let's move on to business. We don't have to levy the additional amount.
I think that's fair. I got a couple speakers who want to speak to the issue, but I think you're probably going to end up around in that ballpark. Councillor Bond, your hand's still up. You're done. Okay. Councillor Hanson, you're up next.
Thank you very much. On the numbers that were presented, I think it does make sense to tax the improvements, which to this point have not been taxed, which, as I understand it, would create a tax increase to the district of $1.849 million in this year. And I think based on what I have heard, it does make sense to add that to the reserve for the appeals, because if the appeals are successful and they cost $3 million and 94% of the 3.6 million has been paid by residences, then and businesses, then we're still talking about businesses and residences subsidizing the tax appeals of heavy industry. So what I think would make sense would be to, as they say, tax that $1.8 million, put it into the reserve for the tax appeals, see where the tax appeals go. And that would protect, from my point of view, residences and businesses from the contingency of those appeals.
Thank you, Councillor Hanson. Councillor Back.
Thank you, Your Worship. I still appreciate what Councillor Hanson said. I still think that that's the best route to take as well, just given that we have gotten these rates down in this class over the last 10 years. And I don't think it would hurt to have that money in the reserves. Yeah, that's kind of where I stand. I still think that what's being recommended makes sense in my mind.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Back. Now I'm gonna throw a great big wrench into the plan here. We have a speaker that has signed up to speak that I think is probably going to want to talk to this issue and the impact on their business. Now, normally with a council workshop, we would wait until the end of the meeting to hear input, but I think before we move on to the broader discussion, we need to hear this input, and then I understand that our decision making doesn't actually really take place until this item comes back to council, but I think it's important, but I also don't want to have it happen with Mr. Wardell away from his desk. Perfect. So at this point, I'm going to call on Jamie O'Connell. Jamie O'Connell, can you hear me?
Yes, Mayor Little. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Welcome. You have 3 minutes to address the tax distribution workshop.
Great. Thank you very much. It's a very good discussion that you're having today. We sent a letter earlier today, and we really hope that you have a chance to read it and go through it in detail over the next week. We are available at any time to answer any questions you have.
To be clear, and for the record, for the people who do not have the email from earlier today, you are with Allied.
Sorry, yeah.
And what's your position?
Allied Shipbuilders, yeah. One of the uncapped major industry properties.
Thank you.
A few points I want to emphasize from the letter. Given our assessments have remained stable from 2020 to 2021, increasing the municipal rate from 11.68 to 17.52 is a 50% increase in our municipal taxes. This would be the third time in 4 years that the district has imposed extraordinary tax increases on this class. even if you change it to 13.59%, it's still a 16.35% increase. So it's not like we're getting any break in terms of that. We've outlined a lot of different things in our letter. A couple of points to make. When we look at the percentage of taxes paid, 2 years that were missing that we didn't have the discussion today was in 2018, it was 12.7%. And in 2019, it was 12.5%. Our percentage of assessment is just over 1%. So when you look at a ratio between our percentage of our assessment versus the percentage that we pay a huge ratio, especially when you look at the what we consume. It's very low in terms of what we consume from a district resource perspective. Couple other quick things. When we talk about capped versus uncapped, the province last year did help out in that. They made it possible for you to charge a different rate. The district did that last year. So the province did actually do something on that. And we were able to see some relief last year that improved the disparity. There's still a disparity, but it was made better. This year, with this tax increase, we're actually going to see the highest level of municipal taxes. And now it's really only the district that we have to blame for that. Final thing, we talk about taxing improvements. We have never seen a different rate for improvements versus our building and our property. We've never seen that. So there seems to be a challenge in terms of what is this taxing improvements that hasn't happened. For us, the rate was very high at 48. The council at the time made a decision to reduce it because of how high it was. We didn't get a refund for all the past years at that high rate, but now we seem to be getting penalized because as our assessed values have went up and the tax rate has went down, we're basically getting penalized for what are these savings that we haven't seen. All we've really seen in the last 3 or 4 years is our assessed values going up and our property taxes going up. So they're now, I think, about 3 times more than what we paid in 2018. So just to give you some, from 2017, correct. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of what we're facing. If we're still, even if you go with a 3% increase, for us it's 16%. And if you go with the rate that is discussed here, it's a 50% increase. And once again, it's only us that is facing this. When we say that 94% of the remaining assessment appeal is funded by residents and business, the fact is no other class has had any tax increase to fund this reserve. It's only major industry. For 2 years we had that. I think it's more fair, and we stated in the letter, it's more fair to say that the additional money in the reserve has come from major industry because we're the ones that have always paid more. Especially based on what we consume as resources, which is very little. Okay. Anything to add? Sorry, I'm a bit emotional about it because it is something that impacts us greatly.
I understand that. Thank you very much for your presentation.
So, Your Worship, I have to make a comment. Jamie, have you been bought out by C-SPAN? That's the rumor on the street.
Sorry, what have we what?
Have you been bought out by C-SPAN? That's a rumor on the street.
No.
We wish.
No.
Good to know. Good to know because council needs to know that stuff.
No.
And then the other thing is, we don't charge taxes based on whether or not you got a fire truck delivered to your house last year. Because if you had to, you would be probably faced with a $600,000 budget. We try to even that all out, and we try to make that all work within the municipality. And I really do appreciate the challenges that you're facing, but we are trying really hard to work with you folks to make this all work. I just want to say that as a CEO, and I'm sure the mayor would echo the same comments.
Yeah, we don't. Definitely, it's some of the characteristics of the PPTA and the BC assessment system that are unfairly punishing the uncapped properties within the group. As Mr. Wardell's presentation said earlier, we have not been rating the class and taking more money out of the class to help support the other classes of groups. It's just that the valuations have gone up so dramatically on the North Shore. I know that's something that people don't realize until they sell something, but that's occurring across all classes. But what's uniquely happening within major industry uncapped is that when C-SPAN gets reassessed and its value changes, it's all of the other properties in the class and disproportionately the uncapped portion of properties in the class that get hammered. And that was not an action by the District of North Vancouver.
And we understand 16, yeah, sorry, we understand the 16% could happen based on a 3% increase could mean 16%. What we really can't understand is once again hitting major industry for this additional thing, which would mean our taxes can go up by 50%.
All I'm saying is that I know you know that we fought that, and so it's not entirely fair to say that the district is doing that to the group. It's something that we have fought hard on, and unfortunately, it is as the C-SPAN valuation has changed and it's affected.
And I would appreciate, Worship, if the non-capped industries would be more united in trying to challenge this legislation, we would be really appreciative, because it is really unfair.
We did challenge it, and the province did make a change. So we were actually very appreciative of what the province did last year. So we were, and the district really helped out with that. And we thanked you for your help last year. So the province did actually assist. It's now really, I would say, more so a challenge we're having with the district.
Well, I
No,
think you
that's
made
not
your position very clear tonight. We do appreciate your presentation, but we're going to return back to the council discussion at this time. Thank you. Councillor Back, your hand is still up from before, or did you still have another question?
I'm sorry, that's from before.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Murray.
Well, I was just going to say that this is, you know, further amplifying that the assessments have always been the constant. The issues around assessments have always been the constant with this, and there's always going to be winners and losers. And, you know, when we're looking at these kinds of increases, you know, the larger port properties, the larger non-cap properties are not going to see the kind of increases that small operations like Allied see. You know, the suggestion has been made that Allied tries to reclassify themselves through appealing to the assessment, to BC assessment. But because there's such strict guidelines in regards to how they're categorized and classified, that's an impossibility too. So, you know, we have to understand, and I think Councillor Bond talked about, you know, let's try to be fair in regards to this. And the CA or the CFO has said that he feels comfortable with the amount in the reserve fund right now based on the appeal, that $3 million is going to be sufficient. So let's leave it at this year, wait to see what happens in July once the other appeal has been heard, and then we can reassess, which is what we've always been doing. We've been doing this year by year by year. So let's apply this fair across the board and then reassess for next year.
Thank you, Councillor Muir. I think everybody, a little bit, at least a little bit better understands the impact that heavy industry is under. So I'm glad we've had this discussion, but I'm going to go back to Andy now to carry on with his presentation so that we can get into the actual discussion about the distribution.
Okay. May I move on to business?
Please.
Okay. So,
Andy, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
We want to get a resolution from council on the business, on the heavy industry issue, which is to refer anything to the next year. I just want to close.
Sure. Yeah, no, totally appreciate that comment, Dave. Through your worship, would you like to propose a resolution on small business? And I would remind council that I presented the goalposts. It could be 0, it could be 1.8, but you've got the full context of that discussion now.
What's the
I want
recommendation?
to be very clear about what we're asking first, because I think the first question we should probably be asking based on our last discussion is whether or not we intend to keep the reserve at its current level. And if we and deal with the heavy industry piece first, then go on to the question about whether we're trying to tax shift amongst classes to support small business.
I'll move that we maintain.
Hold on. I am going to go to Mr. Stewart first, just for
Yeah,
clarification.
your worship, these are financially separate. Okay, one is a risk reserve, the other is whether we want to give a grant for all intents and purposes to business or a break. So we need to separate the two of them. And if the first issue on industry is now is not the time to add more to that, let's just make that motion and move it forward, and then we'll deal with business.
So then I would make the motion that we hold the reserves at the level they are at, and I'll seek a seconder for that motion. Okay, I got second by Councillor Bond. I'm going to call a question on that unless there's absolutely a clarity question someone needs to ask about that reserve piece. We'll move on. We'll go to call the question on the motion. All those in favor? Aye. Okay. Opposed? Okay, it's defeated due to tie. We don't have Councillor Forbes here as our tiebreaker. And so at this point, we haven't provided any clarity to the issue of replenishing the reserves or not.
Council, we can't accept this. That's the way to do business. I'm sorry. We need a majority, and we need to move on tax rates in a fairly short while. So while I appreciate that it was defeated on a tie, I will be coming back to you and if necessary, having a special meeting, because I'm sorry, one of your roles is to set the tax roll and to move forward on this, and a tie won't work. So I'm just being really honest with you.
Yeah.
So, okay.
And that's unfortunately just the reality of sometimes a split vote. Councillor Bond, did you have a question specific about this, or you want me to go on to the next question that we're going to try and get some clarity on? You're muted, sir.
I think, that's like one of the first times I've done that, I feel. I had a roll going there, but so in the absence of any direct clarity, what is the default? Is the default no addition to the reserve, or that
Yes.
would be
Yes.
so the default is no addition to the reserve. So unless Councillor Forbes is in support of an addition to the reserve, then my understanding would be that there is no addition to the reserve this year.
That's correct. We will not administer the additional amounts to industry this year to collect money into reserve for risk management. Period. Done. We're done.
And I think I'll make one final point on this, because we do have to get to the next section. But I think, as was mentioned earlier, I think by you, Mr. Stewart, and Councillor Murray as well, the justification of not taxing the improvements made in major industry over the past number of years to lower the rates, I think we do need to close that as a discussion item, because I think it confuses the greater picture now. The assessed values are the assessed values of land and improvements, and that's what we're going off now. Council made the decision to lower the rates, and we justify it by saying, or back that up by saying, well, we won't technically tax the improvements, but the result is the rates were lowered, and now the assessed values are what they are for both land and improvements. So I think, going forward from this point, it would be, my preference if we kind of, stop that language about not taxing the improvements for a certain amount of time. They're valued right now. My understanding, they're valued in the assessment. The rate is what it is, and from now going forward, we will make decisions about the total amount of tax coming from that class and what the rate will be on that class.
So I regret, Councillor Bond, the language that we've used, because we have to be judicious about how we achieve a council direction. And whether it was improvements or something else, the bottom line is we reduced the value.
But let's be clear.
And that's fair. And you know what? We ought not to get encumbered by how we did that. Because at the end of the day, I think what we did was supportable, but we are now faced in a bit of a crossroads, not necessarily this year as to where we go. And that has a lot to do with where the province goes with respect to assessed values for heavy industry. So
I just wanted to add one thing though. I think we're making an awful lot of the improvement taxation capacity here. Out of the last 10 years, the vast majority of that reduction in mill rate has been because the values have gone up so much. Is that not the simplest way to describe it?
So your worship, you're right on, and that's why I don't want to get into a conversation about improvements. That's a technical reason that staff have used to reduce the value, but it's not the big issue. The big issue is
Wild
we
speculative
need to
value.
bring our value down from 49 to something else to make them competitive. That's the argument that we heard, and we did that. And we should be very happy about doing that. But there is a question about where we go from here.
Okay, so that question is now done. There's no additional money going into the reserves. Next question, Mr. Wardell.
Sure. I just wanted to thank Mr. Stewart for bringing clarity to that, because it has been a continuing conversation. And moving on from that discussion point, as Mr. Stewart pointed out, it's technically the way staff have been tracking it. And if we are moving on from that, then we won't be bringing it up again. So moving on, impacts on business. So as we know, small businesses are continuing to struggle. And with the latest reset by the provincial health officer, it's clear that the same businesses are still struggling: restaurants, tourism, recreation, etc. We have also looked at trying to support small business, because we know some of the really small businesses have been struggling to figure out somewhat complicated provincial and federal grant programs. We had to get some legal advice on whether we could actually provide even that level of support. And it came back with a negative response. So we were unable to support that as well. We looked at, and I think those of you on the Finance and Audit Committee of Council are aware of the work we did over the November-December time period on looking at the permissive tax exemption scheme that the province pulled forward. And what we determined from that is that by implementing this permissive tax scheme, you could actually increase taxes on the most adversely affected COVID impacted businesses. So in the pandemic, this idea that the province created of a permissive tax scheme, it's just not viable during the pandemic. So it's not worth reviewing until post-COVID. So, give me a sec here. So we did talk about business license fees, but there's a timing issue with that. For 2020, our business licenses had already, fees had already been set and the bills had gone out. I've mentioned the tax scheme. I'm going to be coming back to number 3, which is the community charter-based reduction for pretty much all of the Class 6 taxes. And of course, we will continue to advocate actively for more support for businesses and flexibility for both the provinces and the feds. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but we did reach out to the province, and the province was disinclined to provide any additional supports to business through property taxes in 2021 like they did in 2020. So they've left us with the limited blunt instruments that we're going to be talking about next. The problems that we face here, and I'll just recap that. The first 3, they don't discriminate. It's one size fits all. 1, 2, and 4 are not timely. And 2, as I mentioned, is not a workable solution due to COVID. This graph here gives you an idea of the potential for...
Wardell, your screen's actually not shared at the moment.
Oh my, I'm sorry about that. Let me get to that. There we go. Okay, can you see that now?
Yes.
Great. So business class, these are sample reductions. For example, there's 4 on the left-hand column, 1, 2, 3, 4. The first one says reverse the 3%. The impact on The business class would be 525,000. And we've parsed down the business class into small, medium, and large average businesses. And the impact or benefit to a small business would be approximately $84, $220 for a medium-sized business on average, and $450 for the larger businesses. I think the slide is fairly self-explanatory, so I'll go right down to number 4. Maximum discount around 1.8 million, benefit of $285 for a small business, $750 for a medium business, and a little over $1,500 for a large business. So that's the impact of for each business when you look at these different levels here. And it goes up in approximately $500,000 increments, except for number 4, where I maxed it out at 1.8 million. Is there any questions on that slide?
Councillor Murray.
So you're pulling this if we went to the maximum amount, you're pulling $1.849 million from where?
It's called the working capital reserve, operating working capital reserve. It's a reserve with approximately $6.5 million in it.
Okay.
It covers risks of natural disasters and other things. It's also been set up to mitigate any potential tax losses that we might see in the business class for 2021.
So then we would apply that one time, basically
One time.
a grant, basically.
It's a one-time reduction in property taxes. It's not a grant.
Right. So I guess, you know, the same, what I said before was that there's winners and losers in all of this. Those that really need it, and those small businesses. And I wish we had an inventory really of how many small, medium, and large businesses we have, and how many, did I ask that on Monday, Mr. Wardell?
I don't recall that, but what I will say
I
is,
talked to, yeah, I just think it would have been given us a greater idea as to how many businesses would truly impact. There were some businesses during this pandemic that actually benefited.
Correct.
You know, bike shops benefited, I think, grocery stores.
Yes.
But their taxes were already high, so I'm sure that they would appreciate a lowering. So it's just that, you know, the ones that are truly like just trying to keep their heads above water, and I have to go to the restaurants and the bars, you know, the pubs, they are struggling. And now this order has been extended to the May long weekend. And, you know, I hope the province steps up. They did just release a $50 million program, but the businesses that I've talked to, you know, they're so busy just trying to keep their heads above water that the paperwork to get, you know, to be able to achieve any kind of support can be very challenging for some of them, because some of them are just, you know, one-man bands. And so I implore the province to make it simpler and to support these businesses as much as they can. And are we the only municipality in the region, Mr. Wardell, that's doing something like this?
I am not aware. I know that Mr. Danilek and Mr. Iorio are on the call, and unless there's some late breaking news, I am not aware of any other municipality that's having this conversation.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. Councillor Back.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Certainly small and medium-sized businesses have been affected disproportionately in a negative way by the pandemic. And I hear what Councillor Murray is saying too, in that not all small businesses are struggling. There's certainly some that are doing very well. You mentioned bike shops, and any kind of store that sells any sort of sporting equipment right now seems to be doing well. A lot of home-related businesses are doing well, but the reality is that there's still a number of businesses that are not doing very well. Tourism, hospitality, those are sectors that are just, they've been incredibly hard hit. Some recreation or group fitness type businesses can't even open their doors right now. So I think this is the right thing to do. And I think if we are the only municipality doing it in the region, it would be something that we could be really, really proud of. So I do support the full amount that you're recommending there, the 1.849 million. But Mr. Wardell, can you, just a quick question around light industrial properties. Does this include, for instance, a craft brewery or something like that? That would be
anything that is class 5 is not included in this model. The focus has been on class 6.
Okay, so that again, there's businesses in that class that have certainly felt the negative impacts of the pandemic that wouldn't benefit from this, obviously.
Well, that's entirely up to council's decision as well.
Yeah.
In this moment, there is, the tax increase on class 5 is approximately $28,000. Do you mind if I just flip my screens? I'm just gonna stop sharing this one and go to the other screen here. Okay, so back to this little model. If $1.8 million was reduced on class 6, it would look like that, approximately a 7.3% reduction. And I'm just rounding this here, approximately a 7.3 reduction net, but that is actually from the council approved budget. And I'm just going to go down here, a 10.3 reduction in taxes for class 6. If you wanted to reduce the impact on class 5, say by the amount equivalent to the 3% increase, you could do that as well, right there. And the impact would be 0% increase in taxes for class 5 for $28,000.
But this is not affecting any of the other classes because we're
This does
pulling
not
it out
affect-
of a reserve.
This does not affect class 1. This does not affect class 4. Does not affect class 8, which is recreation. It's just class 5 and class 6 to.
So I would support some relief for class 5 as well, if we can sort of work that into the equation.
That's entirely up to council's pleasure.
Councillor Beck, thank you. Next, I have Councillor Curran.
Thanks. Do we know if the so the province changed the school tax, which is significant for business? Is there talk of that happening for another year?
I will, unless Mr. Iorio pipes in right now, my understanding is that school taxes are back up to normal again, and there's no adjustment for 2021 that we're aware of at this point.
Okay. I guess looking at those figures, I really want to reflect on the fact that, and I don't know, it would actually be nice to have this data, is how many small businesses own their properties, because I would venture to guess it's very few. And so this tax benefit is actually going to the property owner, not to the small business. And I think that that's a significant concern, because it is the small business operators of the businesses that will not likely see this benefit. And so I think that's, I would, staff might, Mayor Little looks like he has thoughts about that, but I guess that's one. I don't know what the breakdown is, but I know for renters who pay triple net taxes, like we will not often see the benefit. And I have heard just anecdotally in the community, a lot of small businesses that have not found that their landlords are working with them in spite of some of the grants and things that have been available to landlords. So I just want to point that out because it is the owners and operators that are, I think, struggling. And I also wanted to echo what Councillor Murray said about the grant application process. It is quite cumbersome. And if you've got one person or a small crew, it's a lot of hoops to jump through. I will say that the federal program was the easiest, the easiest thing that I've ever seen in terms of that relief. So that was very helpful. But so I think there's a lot to consider here. I'm interested in hearing from the rest of council.
Mr. Stewart?
Your worship, when I was at CO in West Vancouver, we talked about the challenges for Ambleside. And the fact of the matter is, and I think Councillor Curran has identified those, is that it's not necessary or necessarily achievable that any reduction in taxes that we have for triple net businesses will actually get down to the renters. And the fact of the matter is, if the owner can still charge that market rent, he will not necessarily turn those benefits to the lessees. So I just leave that for you for consideration.
Mike?
Okay. Well, I'm just going to make my own comment. I think what we're finding through this is that this is not in any way a targeted relief mechanism. There are class 5, class 6 properties that have had a difficult time, and class 5 and 6 properties that have had a normal year, and some that have had a bumper year. And so this is just not the mechanism to invoke targeted relief. It's at the class level. It's not the kind of mechanism that the provincial government and federal government have to be able to directly affect the businesses that are negatively impacted. When you went for the CECRA relief from the federal government, you had to demonstrate that you were shut down due to COVID, that you had a cost or an impact due to COVID. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about class level, indiscriminate changes that are going to help maybe some people in a way that is fair and other people in a way that is unfair. My question for Andy, for Mr. Wardell, is when we do this from a reserve, so let's say we were able to bring it down 7.3% on a class 6 property this year, but we do it as a reserve chunk. Then when we get into 2022, if we have not officially shifted the amount of money that we want to collect from each individual class group, are they not going to go back up by over 10%, most likely?
Oh, absolutely. You'll be going right back up to, say, another 3% plus this reduction.
Right. So
Absolutely.
we're actually still in our minds, on our books, increasing the portion, increasing the total amount, not the portion, the total amount of tax that's coming from the class. We're just subsidizing it down temporarily for the year.
Yes.
Next year, they're going to get the hit because they're going to go back up to the point in the curve that they were supposed to be at for 2022. So again, it's an indiscriminate tool. It's not the kind of tool you should use for this kind of relief. The provincial government and the federal government have those kinds of tools. So my view is flat 3%, and then we let the province and the feds who have the targeting tools to see who is negatively impacted, have them step in and be able to assist in those areas. Next speaker is Councillor Bond.
Well, I think I'm pretty much in complete agreement with what you said, Mayor Little. I think we all have the desire to help the businesses in our community that are important to our community. They're important to our residents. Many of those businesses are owned by our residents, and we want to do what we can to assist them, especially in this time of the pandemic and all the struggles that business are facing. But like you said, Mayor Little, this tool of a property class tax reduction doesn't actually ensure that any of the money that we're foregoing in taxes actually gets to any of those businesses. And even looking at the amounts, the average amounts that might go to a particular business that Mr. Wardell had on his previous slide, I don't know if $350 actually makes that much difference to a business that's closed because of COVID. You might be giving it to the landlord because that business is already closed, and the landlord is just paying less on their taxes with an empty storefront. You might be giving it to a top 5 major bank who is still making billions of dollars during the pandemic. And so in that case, I can't support this type of action because, one, we don't know if it's actually going to benefit the people that we want it to benefit. And 2, it will most likely actually benefit those who don't need it. And so, like you said, Mayor Little, it's a very blunt, broad-based tool. And I think it's relatively ineffective to achieve the goal that we want to, which would be to support the individual businesses that are struggling.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Councillor Hanson.
Thank you very much. I'm in agreement with your words, Your Worship, and also Councillor Bond's words. Thank you, Mr. Wardell, for all of the presentations throughout the evening. You have done an excellent job of making complicated subject matter simple. And thank you to Council for all of their comments. The challenge with respect to a reduction in the class 6 business class is that, well, some of the businesses are in need, some of them are not. Some of them have had the greatest profits of a lifetime. And the same applies to residences throughout our community. Some of them are falling on very difficult times through no fault of their own, and despite having worked hard all their life. And some of them, on the other hand, are finding that their financial circumstances are absolutely fine. We definitely need a more targeted approach. And if we were to give a generalized tax reduction to business, I think of how this would be perceived perhaps by a resident who's having challenges not getting any tax reduction, paying the 3% increase, and yet looks over at some businesses that are, some of them more prosperous than ever, receiving a generalized tax deduction. And I also think that a lot of the money would flow to property owners. And one of the peculiar things about COVID is that real estate has gone up in value. So we'd actually be giving these sums of money to people who have seen their net worths increase. We need more targeted strategies. It would be better in my view, to raise the funds involved in the 3% tax increase and look for better ways on our part to support those who are most in need in our community. For example, increasing our social service grants and other mechanisms whereby we can target the money to those who are most affected and in most dire straits. And I think there's broad community support for helping those that are in very needy circumstances. There isn't broad community support to just make a giveaway to business. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hanson. I have Councillor Curran.
Thank you. Yes, so I think council sort of helped to clarify the concerns that I had surrounding if this was actually effective, because I think it is really important to, a lot of times you only get the binary of it's you did this or you don't like business or whatever. And I think that the message is that we really do value our particularly small businesses, and we recognize that COVID has been challenging. Even if you have been successful, it's a challenging time. And so I think although we're not allowed through legislation to do anything to a specific only by class, there's a lot we can do as a community and as a council and with communications to really support all of the businesses, in our community. And so I think we have to continue doing that, but it sounds like this is not the mechanism. And I think I had not considered the fact that the next year you would be right back up there again. So I think there are there's so many other issues, highest and best use, all of these other issues that are huge, but I appreciate the intent of this and thank you, staff. I know you were looking for, at our direction to look at ways to do it, and it just seems like this is not the way.
Thank you, Councillor Curran. Councillor Back.
Just to say that I agree with many of the comments that have been made around the table. I'm the first person to want to help small businesses right now, but recognizing that, if you do it at the class level, and there's going to be a lot of people that don't necessarily need that support that are receiving it. And yes, having to catch up with a sharp increase next year would be almost a slap in the face after, giving some relief this year. So again, I also appreciate that you brought this forward, Mr. Wardell, because we do want to look at anything we can do to support those that need it the most right now. But it's clear that this probably isn't the best way to do it. But I'm hopeful that we can continue to look at some other ways to help the small businesses right now.
Thank you, Councillor Back. Mr. Wardell, are you looking for a motion to prepare bylaws along that line?
So through your worship, I guess we've gone through the conversation. I know Mr. Stewart and I'm sure the clerk are a little bit more qualified to me than to craft a resolution on these lines. But what I'm hearing is we have an approved budget at 3%. That decision has already been adopted. There's really, from what I can see, no decision coming out of tonight. And if there's a resolution required to say that council is satisfied with the 3% tax increase that's already been approved, something for the record along those lines, I guess, would be welcome.
Your worship, if I could suggest something, a simple resolution suggesting that No change to the industrial rate and no change to the business rate as proposed in the budget. I think that's what you intend, isn't it, not Andy?
Yeah, that's
So
the plan.
moved.
Second. Okay,
So the rates to be set, there is a recommendation to a regular council meeting. And the recommendation would be the rates that you see before you here that I'm highlighting, 183 for class 1 residents, 1359 for non-cap properties, 641 for class 5, 470 for class 6, and 409 for class 8. Those would be the recommended rates that are moved forward to a regular meeting of council for first, second, and third.
Fine.
just doing some quick math, and that means my taxes went up. Great. Okay, thank you. But so we have moved and seconded the motion that we hold it flat. Any other discussion on the motion? Okay, call the question on the motion. All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. We have 8 minutes left in the meeting. Just checking in to see, I see a hand on one of the attendees. Oh, that's Councillor Bond. You got demoted. Can we get Councillor Bond back as a panelist, please? There we go. Welcome back, Councillor Bond. Sorry, I just noticed you had been bumped to the attendees, but you had your hand up. Did you have another question?
No, my computer just got the blue screen of death, so I'm on my phone now.
Okay.
Your
right.
worship, can we just verify that vote was unanimous? Councillor Bond disappeared. He may have been gone for the vote. Did he vote in opposition?
I wasn't in the meeting as a panelist during the time, but if you want to retroactively count me in favor, you can do that, or you could mark me absent for the vote.
No, we had it as unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Thank you, Mr. Gordon. Mr. Wardell, any other comments?
Yeah, just for clarity, I never heard back from the clerk about the referral of the rates to a regular council meeting.
We don't have to specifically refer them to it. I mean, we've already given you direction on what
Okay.
to prepare, and I think the date, looking
It's April
forward,
26th.
26th?
Yeah.
Financial Plan Amendment 26th at the 7 o'clock regular meeting of council when that's in our agenda plan.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's automatically referred forward. So,
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Move adjournment?
Okay, I just wanted to check there's no other further comments. Okay, so Councillor Murray has moved adjournment. We have completed the business, so I will accept. Thank you all very much for participating in the workshop this evening, and have a great, hopefully sunny, I think it's supposed to be sunny through till Thursday. So, but if you're getting in your car, you're going too far. So stay in your neighborhood and enjoy your recreation in your own neighborhood. Have a great night.
Good night, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Can we just have that all the time, that line?